Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. If you enjoy the content, please help support the channel by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Your support really helps the channel grow and reach more people. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. The decline of Pax Americana. Pax Americana was built after the Second World War on two main pillars. The first was the United States dollar as the global reserve currency. The second was the American security umbrella that allowed many countries to trade freely without spending heavily on national defense. Under this system, countries could focus on their competitive advantage while America provided the currency, the financial structure, and the military protection. For several decades, this created enormous wealth. Global trade expanded. Populations grew. China rose into a manufacturing giant. Many countries benefited from the stability of the system. But the system also created contradictions that could not last forever. The relationship between China and the United States was never equal trade in the simple sense. America outsourced manufacturing to China. China produced the goods. America consumed them. The money China earned from exports then flowed back into the American financial system. China became the manufacturing power of the world, while America became the financial power of the world. This arrangement hollowed out the American economy. America stopped making enough real things and became increasingly speculative. Wealth moved from production into finance. The economy became more unequal, more corrupt, and more dependent on debt, asset inflation, and financial engineering. Wall Street became the center of the system, while factories disappeared. The problem is that America became addicted to dollar hegemony. The reserve currency status of the dollar allowed Americans to enjoy an inflated standard of living while pushing much of the cost onto the rest of the world. The world produced, America consumed. The world saved in dollars, America printed and borrowed. This gave the United States enormous privilege, but it also created dependence. Once a system gives an empire this level of advantage, the empire will fight desperately to preserve it. That is why the decline of Pax Americana does not mean America simply retreats peacefully. A declining empire does not accept decline calmly. It fights to maintain the old order. It does this in two ways. It tries to strangle its enemies, and it cannibalizes its allies. The main enemies are Russia, China, and Iran. Ukraine has become a proxy war against Russia. The Middle East has become the arena for pressure against Iran. China has faced years of trade war, technological restrictions, sanctions, and strategic encirclement. These are not separate conflicts. They are part of the same attempt to preserve American primacy. At the same time, America is consuming its allies. Europe is being forced to raise NATO spending, buy American weapons, pay tariffs, and purchase expensive American LNG after cutting itself off from cheaper Russian energy. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan are being pressured to move production, invest more in the United States, and align themselves more aggressively against China. Allies are no longer protected in the old sense. They are being drained. After the Second World War, being a frontline state of the American empire brought benefits. West Germany was made stronger than East Germany. South Korea was made stronger than North Korea. Taiwan was made wealthier than mainland China. America invested in its allies because it needed them as showcases against communism. That era is over. A declining empire no longer has enough surplus to enrich its allies. It must extract from them. Europe is pushed toward confrontation with Russia. Japan is pushed toward confrontation with China. Allies buy American energy, American weapons, and American debt. Their own industries weaken while America tries to preserve its center. This is not only Trump's personal strategy. It is structural. Empires in decline behave this way. Athens did it. Rome did it. Britain did it. When an empire loses strength, it becomes more aggressive toward enemies and more exploitative toward allies. Trump becomes the visible face of imperial overreach, but the deeper pattern does not depend on one man. Pax Americana can be compared to Pax Romana. Rome also created a long period of relative stability, trade, development, and political order inside the empire. But that stability rested on slavery, conquest, extraction, and the suffering of the majority. It is easy to romanticize Rome, but most people inside the Roman system were slaves, peasants, or poor subjects living brutal lives. Pax Americana has the same contradiction. A global elite benefited enormously. Perhaps 10% of the world gained wealth, mobility, and comfort. But much of the global south remained trapped under financial dependence, resource extraction, sanctions, debt, and unequal exchange. The American middle class lived at a level that even Roman emperors could not imagine. Food from all over the world, cars, air conditioning, large homes, and endless consumption became normal. But this depended on the rest of the world selling resources cheaply and financing American living standards. That could not last forever. The internal crisis of America is tied to the external crisis of empire. Imperial overstretch drains resources from the core. The domestic economy hollows out. Society decays. Moral authority collapses. Political legitimacy weakens. The empire becomes unable to justify itself to its own people. America now faces several overlapping crises. The first is demographic. The baby boomers became the largest and most powerful political cohort. They control much of the wealth, status, and political influence. Because of modern wealth and medical systems, they live longer and hold power longer. This blocks social mobility for younger generations. Young people see few paths upward. Housing is unaffordable. Good jobs are limited. Wealth is already captured. Institutions are controlled by older elites. Many young people respond by withdrawing from the old work ethic. They gamble, speculate, chase crypto, online schemes, or degenerate forms of escape because ordinary hard work no longer seems to produce a future. When young people stop believing in work, the system imports labor. Some come illegally through the southern border. Others come legally through programs such as H-1B visas, which can function like a form of controlled labor dependence. At the same time, young people stop having children. The economy becomes even more dependent on immigration to sustain itself. This resembles Rome. As Roman citizens lost the will to reproduce and serve the empire, Rome increasingly depended on outsiders. Immigration, demographic exhaustion, and social decay became symptoms of imperial decline. The second crisis is financial. America no longer produces enough. It speculates. The stock market becomes the national religion. Wall Street dominates. Rent-seeking becomes more profitable than production. People make money from assets, debt, property, finance, and monopoly rather than factories, skill, and real output. The third crisis is elite overproduction. Too many wealthy and ambitious people are competing for too few positions of power and status. Washington becomes a battlefield between the old financial oligarchy and the new technology oligarchy. The old guard controls banks, media, and traditional institutions. The new guard wants artificial intelligence, data centers, surveillance systems, and technological control. The conflict between these elites intensifies the instability of the whole system. The American dream once gave the oligarchy legitimacy. In Europe, excessive oligarchic wealth often created resentment and revolution. In America, wealth was defended through the myth of mobility. The rich were not hated in the same way because people believed they had earned their wealth, and that anyone could rise from poverty to riches. But once social mobility disappears, the myth collapses. If ordinary people can no longer rise, then oligarchs no longer appear as symbols of opportunity. They appear as parasites. When that happens, America's oligarchy may face the same kind of rage that oligarchs have faced in other societies. A declining empire usually fights until its last breath. It sends young people to die abroad to preserve its structure. Athens did it. Rome did it. Britain did it in the World Wars. America may follow the same path. If the war with Iran expands, expensive munitions and aircraft may eventually run low. At that point, the pressure for conscription could grow. A national draft would create a legitimacy crisis. Many young American men would refuse to die for a war they see as being provoked by Israel or fought for the interests of Zionists and oligarchs. This could produce a political rupture similar to the Vietnam era, but under more unstable social conditions. Anti-Zionist movements are already emerging in American politics, especially in major cities. A future struggle inside the Democratic Party could push it further left and away from its current dependence on financial elites and pro-Israel networks. A broader rupture may develop across American society as younger generations turn against the old order. When a political system loses moral authority, a strongman can emerge. The Roman Republic produced Julius Caesar because many citizens saw the Republic as corrupt and captured by elites. Caesar promised debt relief, redistribution, order, and a break with oligarchic rule. Many people preferred a king-like figure to a corrupt republic. Something similar could happen in America. Donald Trump could attempt to remain in power or seek a third term in 2028. Many Americans might support it if they believe it is the only way to break the oligarchy that has captured the country. Whether this succeeds or not, it would deepen political violence and constitutional crisis. Europe is even further along the path of collapse. Britain and France appear close to civil conflict. Mass immigration, crime, censorship, bureaucratic overreach, economic decay, and loss of political trust have created explosive conditions. In Britain, people may be punished more harshly for complaining online than for committing actual crimes. The political system looks increasingly authoritarian and disconnected from the public. Even when leaders resign or are replaced, nothing changes because the system remains captured. A new prime minister or president continues the same policies. War in Ukraine continues. Immigration continues. Crime remains unaddressed. Bureaucracy expands. National interests are subordinated to global institutions. Eventually, people will reach a breaking point. The civil conflict in Europe may not follow one clean line. It may involve many conflicts at once. Ethnic tensions, class anger, left versus right violence, nationalist versus globalist struggle, revolutionary attacks on oligarchic symbols, and state repression can all happen together. It may not look like a traditional civil war with two armies. It may look like social breakdown across multiple fronts. The will of the majority no longer matters in the West. Ordinary people vote for peace, stability, conservative values, economic security, public order, and national interest. They receive war, ideological social engineering, mass immigration, censorship, and leaders who serve global institutions. This disconnect cannot continue without consequences. The ruling elite lives inside a bubble. European leaders believe they are close to victory in Ukraine, that Russia will collapse, that a coup against Putin is near, and that Russia will pay reparations. American elites believe they are close to victory in Iran, that China will eventually surrender, and that Wall Street will be allowed to cannibalize China's financial system. They do not care what ordinary people think because they only listen to others inside their own bubble. The media is part of this bubble. Control over legacy media still matters because older generations, especially baby boomers, continue to consume it. As long as the elite can control this cohort, it can keep control over the political system, financial system, and military system. The purchase and reshaping of outlets such as CBS and CNN reflects this strategy. These institutions may be declining, but they still influence the generation that holds wealth and power. At the edges of society, political violence will grow. Some individuals will decide that the oligarchy cannot be defeated through normal politics. Their manifestos may become more coherent, more ideological, and more targeted towards symbols of the global order. This resembles late 19th century Russia, where anarchist and revolutionary organizations targeted the czar, aristocrats, and state officials. When legitimacy collapses, small numbers of radicals can destabilize the entire system. People often dismiss warnings of civil war as exaggeration because they assume the status quo is permanent. But 10 years ago, many things that are now normal would have sounded insane. People being arrested for social media posts in Britain, global lockdowns, mandatory vaccines, NATO enabling long-range strikes deep into Russia, the United States attacking Iran, people being cancelled for speech, open discussion of war with China. These things would have sounded impossible in 2016. The world is already insane. The problem is that people normalize insanity quickly. Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Ukraine, Russia, Iran, Turkey, Egypt, and the wider Middle East all show a pattern of constant escalation. Events that should shock the conscience become normal after a few months. Each new escalation becomes the new baseline. Because people adapt, the system keeps pushing further. Ukraine is now one of the most dangerous fronts. The war cannot remain static. Ukraine has crossed major red lines with attacks on Moscow, strikes on oil infrastructure, pressure on Crimea, and attacks that Russia cannot ignore forever. Ukraine is not doing this alone. It depends on NATO intelligence, targeting, drones, munitions, strategy, and support. For all practical purposes, NATO is already inside the war. Ukraine itself has lost much of its original momentum. Morale is low. Manpower is depleted. Without NATO and European support, it could not sustain this level of escalation. If a new Ukrainian offensive emerges, it will likely be backed by European planning, equipment, and intelligence. Russia may choose patience, letting Ukraine exhaust itself rather than walking into a wider trap. Even if the Ukrainian army collapses, NATO may not accept peace. The war is not run only from Kiev. It is driven by Western interests that have already invested enormous resources. Europe believes it can eventually control Ukraine's resources and force Russia to pay reparations. The sunk cost fallacy now controls policy. Having invested so much, Europe may invest even more rather than admit defeat. NATO's real defeat may not happen on the battlefield. It may happen in the streets of Paris, London, Berlin, and Brussels. If Europe continues pouring resources into an unwinnable war, eventually it may need national drafts and deeper economic sacrifice. That could ignite revolt at home. The American position is slightly different. America benefits if Europe and Russia remain locked in conflict. It can sell weapons to Europe, finance European debt, prop up the dollar, sell LNG, and weaken both Russia and Europe at the same time. From Washington's point of view, the war does not need a clean victory. It only needs to continue. This is cannibalization. Europe cuts itself off from cheap Russian energy and buys expensive American energy. Europe raises military spending and buys American weapons. Europe loses competitiveness while American suppliers profit. Energy security is redefined in absurd terms as dependence on America rather than diversification. The same pattern is visible in East Asia. Taiwan is told to move semiconductor production to the United States. South Korea is pressured to invest more in America. Japan is pushed toward confrontation with China. America once strengthened frontline allies. Now it extracts from them. The world is becoming zero-sum because the Western system no longer has enough surplus to maintain everyone's prosperity. After World War II, the West could enrich itself partly by exploiting the Third World. But the global South has risen, and Western societies have become corrupt, financialized, and dependent. To maintain American living standards, America now has to exploit allies as well. Iran is the next central front. The Memorandum of Understanding with Iran may have seemed like a possible off-ramp, but the deeper conflict remains. The key issue is Lebanon. Iran wants Lebanon included in any settlement and wants Israel to withdraw. Israel will not do that. The United States may try to use the agreement to create divisions inside Iran, especially between the political establishment and the IRGC. The strategy is to weaken Iran by destroying its forward defense network. That means targeting Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militias in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. Hezbollah is especially critical because it directly threatens Israel. If Hezbollah falls, Iran becomes far more exposed. The United States and Israel could then concentrate on Iran itself. Lebanon may be pushed towards civil war. Syria could attack Hezbollah from the north, Israel from the south, and the Lebanese government from within. In Iraq, political moves may be used to weaken Shia militias. In Yemen, Saudi-backed forces may be armed against the Houthis. At the same time, strikes against IRGC positions and defenses may prepare for broader operations. If Iran's regional allies are destroyed, the IRGC loses much of its leverage. The Iranian political establishment may then be pressured to accept terms it would otherwise reject. The broader aim is not peace, but the dismantling of Iran's strategic depth. The same script is used again and again. In Syria, the public was told the West was helping people against their government. The result is an al-Qaeda-linked figure ruling Syria, massacres of minorities, and the use of Syria as a tool against Lebanon. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Ukraine, and Iran all follow a similar pattern. Humanitarian language hides strategic destruction. Islamic extremism is also part of this imperial pattern. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are presented as enemies of the West, but there is strong reason within this view to see them as creations or instruments of Anglo-American power. Earlier, Wahhabi extremism served British imperial interests. The point is not that extremism is indigenous to Islam, but that empires cultivate violent religious movements when those movements serve geopolitical goals. The decline of Pax Americana is therefore not a clean transition. It is a period of war, cannibalization, social breakdown, and narrative collapse. The empire is trying to strangle Russia, China, and Iran while draining Europe, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and its own domestic population. The internal and external crises are one crisis. The old system cannot provide prosperity, legitimacy, or peace anymore. It can only produce debt, speculation, censorship, immigration crises, war, social fragmentation, and elite delusion. The American empire will not fall because one enemy defeats it in a simple way. It will fall because its contradictions become impossible to manage. The end of Pax Americana will be dangerous because empires do not die quietly. They escalate abroad and repress at home. They send young people to fight wars that cannot be won. They blame enemies for problems created by their own system. They cannibalize allies. They normalize insanity until society forgets what normal life looked like. The question is not whether Pax Americana is ending. It is already ending. The question is how much damage the empire will cause as it struggles to preserve a world that no longer works.